You're listening to Built to Convert, the podcast where growth-minded marketers, founders, and creators come to level up. No hype, no guesswork, just bold insights that drive results. Let's go.
Hi, I'm Tyler Lane, founder of Session Interactive and host of Built to Convert, where I talk with growth-minded leaders in healthcare, tech, e-commerce, and finance. We dig into how data, marketing, and strategy come together to help organizations make smarter decisions and scale with purpose in today's digital world. Thanks for tuning into this special episode where we take a look back at some of our favorite moments from previous conversations. It's brought to you by Session Interactive, a performance marketing agency that helps businesses turn complex data into clear strategy. From SEO and analytics to paid media and content, Session zeroes in on what truly drives growth: smarter decisions and better user experiences. Known for their collaborative approach and measurable results, they partner with forward-thinking companies across industries to solve digital challenges and turn them into opportunities. Learn more at sessioninteractive.com. Now let's hear some top moments from past conversations.
Because the AI, from an academic perspective, is machines and models to duplicate or replicate sort of the human mind and activity. So now you can think data from Star Trek, right? Data from Star Trek is machine and algorithms together, right? Are we anywhere near the data and, artificial general intelligence with sentience? No, we're probably a century away from that. The math doesn't exist to do that kind of work,
Sure.
right? But it helps, right? To say, okay, robots are on one side, algorithms on the other, right? And then we're talking algorithms. We say, well, the first set of algorithms you think about is machine learning. That's your very first set of AI models. And then under machine learning is deep learning, a type of machine learning. And then under deep learning is enforcer learning, LLMs, right? That is a type of deep learning. So then you start to say, okay, well, now AI is a set of machine learning algorithms that have types and sets and values based on the data or information it produces. Then you get to LLMs to say LLMs isn't necessarily just generative. LLMs is just a means to prompt questions to get prompted based answers, right? And in fact, it doesn't need to even be a text answer. It might be a prompt as the output to be the LLM to be the input, right? That's the agentic AI implementation where I have multiple orchestrated LLMs reasoning between each other, sort of performing a function. LLM doesn't necessarily mean text creation.
What we're seeing on the programming, right, the software development front, is that so I've got some friends, and we got our own software development team. And what we're hearing is that in the past, if you were in software development, even kind of in a senior role, you might spend 80% of your time programming and 20% of your time strategizing. And that has now flipped, where now you're spending 80% of your time strategizing and 20% of your time actually programming. And AI has made that possible. And so I think there's something very analogous in the marketing, how marketing teams are going to run, where we're going to be doing less of sort of that doing of putting out those assets, or and verifying those assets and all the logistics and execution that goes with it. There'll probably be less time spent on that and more time on what should we be doing? What really is our ideal customer? What does an effective PR campaign really look like? And so I think we're going to see a similar sort of flip in marketing, where it's really going to push people to start being more strategic. There'll be less of those just sort of doing roles and more of those thinking roles, where you're orchestrating and strategizing a much more robust marketing program.
There's lots of different guidelines on prompting. I actually have used a variation of Christopher Penn's prompt of race, but I added G to it, and it's grace. G for goal, R for role, A for actions, C for context, and then E for examples. The more that you give it that, the better. However, I even think that falls short because it's just the mechanics of it, right? We're not pushing this thing to actually think differently. So I would argue that we need to say things like, show me some counterintuitive ideas. Show me some well-accepted facts that are not supported by data. show me some things, some topics that are rarely covered. Like make this thing think. And there's nothing in a Grace prompt or nothing in an OpenAI prompt guideline that tells us how to think differently.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue AI will not think differently unless we think differently.
So typically for local businesses, I tend to see people fall into one of two buckets. Either it's the non-prioritization of local signals,
Sure.
which would be, you tend to see that with clients that don't have large budgets, your typical mom and pop type businesses. It's not a priority for them. They're more interested in keeping the lights on and the doors open. Yeah. Unfortunately, it's kind of a backwards way of looking at it because as I'm sure we've all heard before, it is an investment. And as long as you're getting an ROI out of that, you tend to, it makes it all worthwhile. Going out a little broader and a little bit more macro with it, I think the other issue that I tend to see with a lot of people is doing the same old. And while you want to do, quote unquote, all of the things, because there are certain levers that Google will kind of amplify or pull back on. Google Posts was one of them that we talked about a little bit before. Citations, I've seen they'll pull back on the influence of citations, and right now it's brand signal. So it's a modified way of how citations work. Mm-hmm. It's understanding what levers to pull in the right order and kind of at the right time to do that. In general, what we also tend to look at as well is when it comes to local businesses, one thing that we really emphasize is, again, building that brand, making sure that you actually bridge that gap between, again, the real world and the digital. Mm-hmm. You can't escape. If you have a bad reputation, that's going to follow you online and offline.
Whenever I would talk about SEO, when Volume 9 was primarily an SEO agency first and foremost, people always wanted to talk about keyword research or, how to do keyword density and NLPs and all. And I said, hold on a second. And I would take them to the 10 things that Google holds to be true. Mm-hmm. And number one is focus on the user and all else will follow. And, even today, like I know, David Yarian, of course, he still subscribes to that. Like if you focus on the user mm-hmm. and then you do SEO, you're aligned with Google. Right. So to answer your question, when we think about AI, it's not about how to optimize your brand for the large language model. That is a question. It's not a bad question. I mean, It is a tactical question, mm-hmm. but we need to step back and say, wait a second. How is the user? How is the shopper? How is problem searching, searching to solve a problem, mm-hmm. going to change going forward? And when you think about that, there's a different answer that you arrive at, and we can talk about that a little bit, than how to optimize using GEO, SEO, and mm-hmm. content. Like there's a different conversation that takes place when you think about how voice search or Apple Intelligence or Search GPT or Perplexity are changing. Now, early adopters still, mm-hmm. but they're changing the way that people do things in their browser to gather information to make a decision. Mm-hmm. Like that's a game changer. And that's what we need to understand, because then you can figure out what you need to do as an agency or a brand or as a marketer, or as an entrepreneur. And you're moving towards that puck a year or two down the road.
Thanks for listening to Built to Convert. If you're serious about growth, don't just listen. Subscribe, leave a review, and follow us for new episodes that drop straight into your feed. Until next time, keep building.